Hello, my name is Dana Ružičková, and in this presentation I will be talking about folk music and folklore, explaining mainly the development and impact of this music phenomenon in Slovak society and Slovak culture. Folk music is any style of music which represents a community and can be sang or played by people who may or may not actually be trained musicians, using the instruments available to them. Folk music includes both traditional music and the genre that evolved from it during the 20th century folk revival. The term originated in the 19th century but is often applied to music that is older than that. Traditional folk music has been defined in several ways as music transmitted orally or as music with unknown composers. It has been contrasted with commercial or classical styles. One meaning often given is that of old songs with unknown composers, another is music that has been transmitted and evolved by a process of oral transmission or performed by custom over a long period of time. Music of folklore usually consists of two components, folk music and songs, and folk instruments. Folk songs are one of the oldest expressions of art. In Slovakia, most of the folk songs were created for special occasions, such as a successful harvesting, songs sang by shepherds, hunters, and so on. Folk music commemorates historical and personal events. On certain days of the year, such as Easter, May Day, and Christmas, particular songs celebrate the yearly cycle. Weddings, birthdays, and funerals may also be noted with songs, dances, and special costumes. The very specific instrument which originated in Detva region is high shepherd pipe, the so-called fujara. For its excellence, brilliant simplicity of the design, and the basic operating, it was included in the UNESCO list of oral and intangible heritage of humanity. The fujara is a contrabass instrument that creates a long resonant timbre. It was originally played by shepherds. Now it can be heard in folk festivals. Slovak folk music has regional character. Not only songs and orchestras, but also folk costumes are different from region to region. The regional variations of the same songs or musical motifs are common, with more versions of the same text with the different music. Music in various regions differentiates also by instrument compositions, for example string or more brass. The term folklore has its roots in Slovakia's national renaissance from the 19th century. This ideology led to interpretation and reformation of folk oral traditions in the way that their aim could be political and ideological. Slovak folk music established the first era of the history of Slovak national music. Folk music wasn't written down in tangible form and was only spread by word of mouth from older generations to younger ones. Therefore, most of the folk songs are dated by the occasion they were created for or by the difficulty of the style and expression. Throughout Slovakia's history, folk music developed independently in many regions, creating a rich heritage over time. Naturally, national music traditions eventually incorporated it, so that modern music from the 19th century onwards fused both classical and folk elements. Exemplary composers working in this vein included Jan Bela, as well as Alexander Mojzes and Jan Ciker. Folklore traditions used to be only a phenomenon that lived independently in villages as a part of the everyday life of the local inhabitants. The role of folklore has essentially changed alongside the transformation of the society. Nevertheless, it is necessary to add that in the period of the first interest in the disappearing expression of traditional folk culture and the safeguarding thereof, which was evident as early as the second half of the 20th century, this culture was still a functioning system whose transformations influenced by new elements coming from the town society had only just started. This line of many expressions of folk culture and the transformation of other ones were accelerated by two world wars in the Slovak environment in the 20th century. In consideration of political development, the second half of the last century accentuated traditional folklore, better said, that the part that was acceptable to the doctrine of the totalitarian communistic regime and that could be used in the folklore movement, which was strongly developing at that time. The former communistic bloc had a similar model for the approach to folklore and its adaptation for stage performances. Folk music and folklore keep their reputation as traditional signs and events that relate to cultural heritage, and simultaneously they are supposed to be the gatekeepers against the danger of globalization. In many Slovak villages, it is the village youth who are responsible for maintaining the local traditions. Men and women's folklore bands move between the organized folklore movement and spontaneous everyday culture with a strong link to the local original folklore tradition. The research result shows that folklore singing and music in the contemporary Slovak society are rather connected with team activities and with groups of practitioners, singers, dancers, musicians, very often in the presence of a more or less passive audience. The text analysis of new works shows it has moved from the themes related to already extinct expressions of traditional folk culture in the field of livelihood, such as farming, handicrafts, home production, and so on, and social relations, to the motives that satisfy the contemporary ideas of authors and interpreters about living folklore and traditions. To a large extent, the activity of folklore choirs affects the cultural and social life in the villages. In many locations, these ensembles have taken over the task of voluntary fire teams, which became one of the most important tradition keepers in the second half of the 20th century. Today, chorus take part not only in maintaining the ethnocultural traditions, but also they encourage the formation of new activities referring to older folklore traditions, but only based on some expressions of traditional folk culture, like songs, dances, folk costumes, and so on. These include live nativity scenes at Christmas, opening of wine cellars, slivovitz tasting, as well as the already mention meetings or shows of choirs which have evolved into local folklore festivals in many cases, with the participation of visiting folklore ensembles. Folklore traditions fulfill numerous functions in contemporary Slovak society which are connected with the everyday culture of their practitioners. However, they play an important role in a different context than in that of their formation. The historical and social development assign new roles to folklore and other expressions of traditional folk culture. These traditions are understood as reasonable leisure time activities. They are space for fulfilling the personal needs of the participants, especially within the organized folklore movement, but also outside it. In some regions, they are also an important element to create and maintain the collective identity and its outside representation. The traditions fulfill a function of goods. They are an important business article in the field of tourism, the hospitality industry, services connected with recreation. They play a certain role in the field of ecological agriculture. Folklore is becoming an attractive scene for commercial events, such as tasting of products of so-called traditional cuisine or alcoholic drinks, such as wine, beer, or different kinds of brandies. Despite the fact that the relation of the Slovak society to folklore traditions is rather ambivalent, mainly because of folklorism in totalitarian Czechoslovakia, as mentioned above. This is an important phenomenon, intentionally and institutionally supported and understood as cultural heritage, not only in Slovakia but also in other places. The intangible and tangible cultural heritage fulfills many social and cultural functions. In the 21st century, many folklore ensembles decided to make a recording as a target of their work. Demand for this kind of music is not significant, mainly because people connect folk music with dance and live performances. Therefore, a recording would not have the same value as live performance for them. The assemblers that do not accentuate the quality in the sense of systematic artistic work and public presentation record the CD solely for their own need. In some cases, as a non-public recording, however, in most cases, this editorial work is to represent the choir, village, and its folk music and folklore traditions. The first problem concerning folk music are lyrics. As mentioned before, folk music has old tradition in Slovak Republic. Most of the folk songs were written many years ago, and therefore the lyrics were usually describing already extinct daily situation of the livelihood. When listening to folk songs nowadays, it can be noticed that one of the concerning issues is difficulty to understand the meaning of the lyrics. Many of the words are archaic and are not used nowadays. Therefore, many people, especially youth, have problems understanding the meaning, which often leads to lack of interest in folk music and folklore. Internet and social media are also one of the challenges of today's folk music and folklore traditions. Although among folklorists it is still not fully accepted, for the generation of digital natives it is evident that computer-mediated communication is suitable for transmitting folklore as well. The main counter-argument questioning that the above mentioned modern sources can be considered folklore is the lack of word of mouth, which was considered the most important characteristic feature of folk poetry for a long time. The dynamics of the spread of e-folklore and within this the internet folklore is different from that of traditional oral folklore products that were passed on from generation to generation. To my mind, concerning their interactivity and synchronism, online information is closer to oral written traditions. Internet is also helpful media where folk music, folklore and traditions can be shared worldwide. It is also easy way for approaching youth. In the past few years, the problem of copyright of folk songs has significantly risen. The main trouble can be seen between Slovak collection society called SOZA and folk ensembles. What these folk bands do not realize is that many of folk songs they are performing were written by an author. There are three categories of folk songs. First one are songs which are not protected because the author is unknown, and these songs are cultural heritage. The second category are songs composed by a particular author, and these songs are clearly protected by the copyright. The last group of folk songs are songs that are considered people's songs. That means that people consider these songs as songs written by unknown authors because they are really well known. However, these songs were usually either written or rearranged by someone. Many people and even media don't understand this difference, and this is usually what causes most of the problems concerning copyrights and IP in Slovak Republic.